Hey, everybody. Can you hear me? Super. Welcome to the 2024 NYIC Authors Event, otherwise known as an evening read. We are so grateful to have you with us, be it in person or virtually. I am Heather Varian. I'm the Vice President of Development here at the NYIC. I have said this before tonight to folks in the room and folks digitally. This is hands down my favorite event of the year, and not just because most of us are rapacious readers on the team, just because it's great. It's a great intersection of art and the work that we do, and I couldn't be more thrilled to be here. First and foremost, I just want to thank all of you for being here, but I want to thank our sponsors. First up, we have the Anjali Singh Agency, who are our Chinua Achebe sponsor. We have our Jamaica Kincaid sponsor, the inimitable Michael Hirshhorn and his lovely Jimena Martinez. Gregory Morris is tonight's Edwidge Danticat sponsor. And then for our Jhumpa Lahiri sponsors, we have Mark Foggin, Hillary Weissman, Fred Gittner, and Teresa Gonzalez. I want to also be sure to thank our incredible panelists tonight, Nawaaz Ahmed, Ghanameh, Karla Cornejo Villavicencio, excuse me, I stumbled over that one, and the wonderful Whitney Hugh. Many of you know what the NYC is and what we do. For those who don't, we are the oldest and one of the largest immigration coalitions in the United States. We were formed the last time there was any movement on immigration reform in the year 1987. And yes, it has been that long. We are comprised of about 200 member organizations across the state of New York. And we do some really powerful work trying to advance causes, special, important, pertinent, etc., to our community. I don't want to get into too much detail about the NYC. I feel like from what I was hearing earlier, many of you are familiar. A little bit of housekeeping. For those in the room, there will be a Q&A session at the end of this. There is a piece of paper and a pen on your chair. You're to submit those to staff. You'll see them pop around when the moment arises for you to kind of fill out or ask questions. For those in the room, or virtually, excuse me, you will populate whatever platform you're on's Q&A, and that will be sent to a moderator who will then forward it on to the group. Without your support, none of this work can be done. This is an event that we love to bring people together, but I am, as I mentioned, the Vice President of Development, so I would be remiss if I did not ask for you to consider making a gift at the end of this evening. You'll have the opportunity, again, virtually or in person, to make a gift. There are QR codes located throughout the room, and there will be a link shared with you shortly and within the chat as the evening goes on. And now, without further ado, I would like to pass the mic to a wonderful lady who I met because of the NYIC, so the gifts keep on giving. Whitney Hugh serves as the Director of Civic Engagement and Research at Churches United for Fair Housing. If you are in New York, she is very busy trying to fight the governor about all kinds of housing changes that will really dramatically impact both our communities and probably many of us. She's a community organizer based in Sunset Park. Previously, she held roles as the Director of Public Programs for the National Book Foundation. You'll see the alignment soon and now. And as the Marketing and Communications Director for the Strand Bookstore. Additionally, she serves as the Publications Chair and Board Member for Feminist Press. She played a pivotal role co-founding the South Brooklyn Mutual Aid and the South Brooklyn Sanctuary, a pro se legal clinic, where she currently serves as the board chair. And now, without further ado, you don't want to hear from me anymore. Let's get right into the good stuff. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here. Churches United for Fair Housing is also a member of NYIC, and we're so grateful for both just the advocacy and the work that the coalition does and everybody else, and also to be here tonight. It feels like a nice homecoming to come back into the literary roots and to combine it with I think both the immigration advocacy and the political lens that I think we are all very in tune with. The three authors tonight, I have had such a joy reading through all their books these past 2 weeks. And as the state budget negotiations have gone on, it's been really great to force myself away from Twitter to actually read just some of the most beautiful pieces of work of literature that I've read in a while. And I don't say that very lightly. I'm actually like, go purchase these books. If you have a book club, these are great books for them. And I think the questions that all these books bring up are themes that I think we're all very familiar with. We're talking about identity, immigration, our diaspora communities, family dynamics, political commentary, and really just meditating on the role of what literature does when it comes to amplifying marginalized voices. If you are like me, you will cry, you will feel things, you will reflect about your own family dynamics or the ways that you've acted in public. There's a lot of moments of reflection when I was reading these pieces, so I'm very excited. The format is we're going to start with the authors coming up and reading their pieces. You're going to get a nice taste of their works, and then we're going to move forward into some questions that I pulled together. I sort of tailored individual questions for each author. They get one, moving over to questions for all of them, and then doing some that are a little bit more politically geared for NYIC. And then we have a Q&A for about 20 minutes. So while you're listening, please definitely be coming up with questions. Sometimes the audience has smarter questions than I can ever pull together. So with that, I would love to introduce Nawaaz Ahmed, who wrote Radiant Fugitives. Nawaaz Ahmed is a transplant from Tamil Nadu in India. Before turning to writing, he was a computer scientist researching search algorithms for Yahoo. His first novel, Radiant Fugitives, which came out in 2021, was a finalist for the 2002 Penn Faulkner Award and the Edmund White Award for debut fiction. He currently lives in Brooklyn. Thank you.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here, and especially in such great company. I'm going to read a small section from my book, Radiant Fugitives, and this is somewhere in the middle, but you don't actually need to know anything. Two other things happen in the first 6 months of my to-be parents getting together. One that stokes their anger, and one that offers them hope. In April, stories of torture and rape of Iraqi detainees by American soldiers are reported by the national media. The photos emerging from the Abu Ghraib prison horrify, of naked brown men in barred prison cells and dimly lit corridors, some hooded, some shackled, some dragged around on dog leashes, some posed in sexual positions, some heaped like carcasses, while American soldiers, white and in uniform, stand around them, over them, straddling them, flashing triumphant smiles and thumbs ups. Seema is outraged, though not surprised. Bill is especially haunted by one photo. A detainee hooded and robed in black, the lines reminiscent of the white regalia of the Ku Klux Klan, a savage irony, for he is precariously poised on a cardboard box, arms to the sides, wires running from his fingers to electrical connections behind him. It's his father's face Bill imagines under the hood, a father who had died in prison, reportedly of a ruptured appendix. Seema has never seen Bill this shaken, his anger shining through his attempts to repress it. She welcomes it, even as she comforts him. He is as riled as she that the Democratic nominee to challenge Bush is to be Senator John Kerry, who had voted to authorize the Iraq War, only lately coming out against it, professing to have been misled about Iraq's WMDs. Kerry's vice presidential pick is slick-haired Senator John Edwards, who had also voted in support of the war. At the Democratic Convention in July, Kerry accepts the nomination with a salute, touting his military credentials and Purple Heart, which Bill and Seema watch with disgust. But at the same convention, a young state senator from Illinois running for the US Senate gives a keynote speech that electrifies them. He's fresh-faced but confident. He's black, and his words soar. He speaks of hope, not blind optimism, not willful ignorance, but the hope of immigrants setting out for distant shores, the hope of slaves sitting around fires singing freedom songs. What is this audacious hope? A belief in things not seen, a belief that there lie better days ahead. What is it based on? It's only in America, Barack Obama says, that such things are possible. with its faith in simple dreams and insistence on small miracles, in hard work and perseverance, summed up in a declaration made more than 200 years ago. We hold these truths to be self evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Isn't his presence on this stage improbable enough that it constitutes proof? It's the messenger, of course, as much as the message. My to be father is immediately smitten, a prophet in his own image, living and preaching a message of belonging and flourishing in America. There seems to be no anger in Obama, his face soft, open, solemn, creasing to sweetness whenever he smiles. So different from Bill's father in the photo his grandmother had kept hidden, with a gun and the hard set to his jawline. My to be mother is at first a little skeptical, with the wariness of the recently burned, made uneasy precisely by Obama's lack of anger. But Bill channels Obama with the single mindedness of an evangelist, and he succeeds in persuading Seema to join him in his faith. Her last reservation is suspended when he reads to her Obama's speech denouncing the Iraq War from 2 years earlier. No sooner does the Kerry Edwards ticket lose in November than a buzz begins to build around Obama, even though he has just won his first term to the US Senate and has denied any presidential ambitions. Bill and Seema become early acolytes. And 2 years later, when Obama publicly announces his candidacy, they will be joined by a growing multitude ready to follow him. And along the way, Bill and Seema become lovers, get married, and move in together into a house on the top of a hill with spectacular views of a peninsular city and sparkling bay, visible when the fog permits. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nawaaz. That was great. Great. Now I would love to introduce Aya Ghanameh, who wrote These Olive Trees. Aya is a Palestinian illustrator, writer, and designer from Amman, Jordan, currently based in New York City. Her work moves away from state-centric ways of thinking to center the voices of ordinary people in historical and political narratives. Her debut picture book, These Olive Trees, which came out last fall, was inspired by the experiences of her family who cultivated her love of the earth throughout her upbringing in exile. And with that, I'd love to introduce Aya.
Thank you. So I was going to read my picture book because it is a children's book, so it's short enough that I can read it in the time that I have. And since it's a picture book, we did want to share the actual pictures. I thought it would be a little weird if I was just reading this without the actual art elements. I'm primarily an artist, so if we could turn to the next page. Yeah, so it's a title page. It's called These Olive Trees. And the next page, we can get into the story. Every year, Mama harvests the olives right outside the refugee camp where Araib and her family live. This year, as she prunes the olive grove under a sky of infinite blue-gray, Araib wonders about the first person to ever taste the small oval fruit. She imagines them picking the olive and biting halfway down into its savory center. They must have waited years for the tree to produce even a single fruit. Did they like how it tasted? Araib thinks they must have hated it. Olives don't always taste very good directly from the tree. They can be quite bitter at first. Or maybe, Araib ponders, they were pleasantly surprised by its acidity. Araib is always too impatient to go through the weeks-long process of curing and brining the fruit, the way her mama taught her. Too eager to taste the olive straight from the tree, she ends up disappointed by the bitter taste. But sometimes, the olive surprises her, and she finds joy in the bitterness. After all, with work and patience, these bitter olives can be used to make so many things. In the refugee camp, they use the trimmings from the trees to light fires and to make ornaments and tools. They press the oil from the olives to cook, and even to make soap. Sometimes, her life in the camp surprises her too, and she finds happiness in the sorrow around her. Mama passes the olives to Araib, who always helps her family in the grove. It's odd that we're gathering the olives so soon, Araib thinks to herself. It's not harvest season quite yet. Still, Arayb prepares herself to stomp, stomp, stomp on the olives as she always does, to remove their pits and pour their oozing liquid into pressed bags. But her mama stops her. We are not cleaning or crushing any olives today, says Mama, just packing them to go. Go. Mama nods. Go. Mama and the rest of their family used to live in a village called Al-Tira, by the coast of Palestine. Generations of her family had tended the olive trees there, too, for hundreds of years. But one day, before Arayb was born, the war came. They carried what they could and walked for many days until they reached the other side of the country to escape it. But they couldn't save their olive trees. Since then, they have lived in a makeshift canvas house in the Balata refugee camp near the city of Nablus. Arayb and her younger brother and sister were born here. The camp is the only home she's ever known. And there are more olive trees here. Arayb and her mama walk back from the orchard, carrying the olives and tree trimmings. But within the camp, piles of blankets and boxes now line the rows of tents. Families frantically load trucks with bundles of wrapped canvas. Are we going on a trip? Arayb asks. Yes, dear. Mama's eyes look misty. The war has come to our doorstep again, even in Balata camp. The sky is gray, and the earth is damp with the knowledge that the war has found its way to Nablus. Where are we going? Do we have to go? Arayb asks Mama. Mama pauses. I don't know where. But wherever we go, we have each other. But what about our house? What about the olive trees? We will have a new tent. As for the trees, says Mama, we can't save them. Mama follows Arayb's siblings into the tent, helping the rest of the family gather their belongings. Alone outside, Arayb looks at the olive pits lying around their tent, the pits they had prepared to be planted in the fall. We can, she decides. I will borrow an olive and plant its seed. She is sure the earth would not mind. She looks to the sky. May I borrow your rain? She is sure the clouds would not mind either, for it may be the last time she sees the sky above her home for a while. After all, someone needs to look after the land so their olive trees live on. Gently, she plants a pit. Although olive trees take a long time to grow, and even longer to produce olives, Arayb decides that for once she will be patient. Wait for me. One day, when we're older, I'll return to you for harvest. And at the very end, I have an author's note, and I wanted to read like a little portion of it since this is a children's book, and I know that this audience is primarily adults, but I feel like sometimes children's stories can provide a comfort or say things with so little that you don't necessarily get from, another medium. Like that's the beauty of this format. So Arayb's story never ended. My grandmother Arayb was born in Nablus, Palestine in 1953 after the exodus called the Nakba, or the catastrophe, upended the lives of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in 1948. Growing up in Jordan, I learned that the story of my family's Nakba was only a fraction of a broader campaign to empty every Palestinian city of Palestinians. This included Haifa, located today inside the Green Line past the apartheid wall through which we cannot return. To this day, Palestinians are being forcibly removed from their homes as the occupying state swallows the land in its entirety. The Nakba is not a single story that could be told in a book. It is not only Arayb's story either. It is the story of every child displaced, from the military occupation of Nablus to the blockade of Gaza. It is the story of every Palestinian refugee who is condemned to a life in the refugee camps, and the story of every olive tree still standing. Like these olive trees, we are still here. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Aya. And I'm glad people got to see the full thing because it's truly a really beautiful piece of work.
Thank you.
Great. And with that, last but certainly not least, we're going to be introducing Karla Cornejo Villavicencio, who wrote Undocumented Americans and Catalina. Karla is the author of the National Book Award finalist, The Undocumented Americans. Her work, which focuses on race, culture, and immigration, has appeared in the New York Times, The New Yorker, Vogue, Elle, N+1, The New Inquiry, Interview, and on NPR. Her new upcoming book, Catalina, will be released in July.
Thank you. My grandmother saw me off in Chinatown each Sunday night, sending me back to school with kimbap and wakame from a shop off Mott Street. My grandparents loved Chinatown. They were on teasing terms with the cashiers at a little bakery where they got sweet coffee and melon-flavored bread. I spent a lot of time in Chinatown as a kid. Whenever we wanted to go on an outing as a family, that's where we went. We were a very big seafood family, and my grandpa had friends at the various fish markets. It's where I discovered he knew how to speak English just fine. I was on my BlackBerry while he was doing his thing in front of the big red sea bass on ice when I started making out parts of the conversation. To my surprise, he was speaking in English. For years, he had made me translate for him at the doctor, the bank, the DMV, and it turns out he could speak English this whole time. The fishmonger spoke a similar English, whimsically conjugated English, but American English it undeniably was. Immigrant English, a dialect all their own. Gloria Anzaldúa said that when the third world and the first world meet, they rub against each other and produce an open wound. Chinatown, though, it was a pretty sight. As the bus peeled out of New York, I felt overwhelming relief to be leaving them, and that relief gnawed at me. My grandparents took me in. They gave me everything. But I felt nothing for them. I missed my parents, but I do not remember loving them. I might have loved my aunt and uncle as a child, but I was so young I do not remember. Feeling nothing for my family made me feel evil, broken. The Latin Day campus groups seemed to be full of people who loved their families. When they performed moving spoken word poems about their ancestors and talked about their abuelas cooking or singing or sharing gems of wisdom, I found myself dissociating, I don't know which it is. And like in a fever dream, all the abuelas melted together into one large, magnanimous super abuela that shared a room with Jesus in the sky and sat above us like a pancake. To many of my ancestors, I would have been just another little brown girl, forgotten on another continent, passed around from hand to hand. Imagine being born a goldfish. I returned to my dorm late one Sunday night to find a yellow envelope leaning against my door. I opened it immediately, and when I saw its contents, I rushed into my room, double-checked the lock on the door, turned off the lights, and pulled down the shades. The envelope was filled with coca tea bags from NW. He'd read my essay, the one Abel had not been quite impressed by, where I rambled about having never tried coca. After catching me reading it over one day at the Peabody front desk, Nathaniel had goaded me into letting him read it. "What's so interesting?" he asked, leaning over the desk. "No, not now," I said, without looking up. "Sorry, are you enthralling yourself with your own writing? I can see it says Catalina Iturralde at the top." "Jesus Christ," I said. "Show me, please, come on, I want to read your paper too." I pushed the paper toward him. He snatched it up, skimmed the first 2 pages, then looked up at me, suddenly full of pizzazz. "Did I ever tell you the story of the old lady I met during research who must have been at least 80 years old, who insisted right then and there that we chew coca together? And I was like, am I seriously doing drugs with an octogenarian? What is my life?" Nathaniel had shown me his cards. Coca leaves are illegal in the United States. He, or his father, had broken laws I didn't even know existed because I was scared that learning laws about customs or the transportation of dry foodstuffs, or even Googling how you transport anything internationally outside of using the Delgado Travel in Jackson Heights, would implicate me in the human trafficking ring I always suspected I had connection to. On some level, I believed that everyone did. Like my grandmother, I had been socialized around a certain type of man: the strong man, the caudillo, the jefe, the elder, the don, the capo, the OG, the godfather, the Italian deli owner who has for the past 15 years personally prepared the morning coffee preferred by highway workers and the early birds of the 83rd precinct of the NYPD. People who knew people. Was this finally my turn? Would the small-town teenage beauty queen be getting flowers from the visiting drug lord? I felt burdened by a new power. I flushed the tea bags down the toilet while making the sign of the cross. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Karla. That's so exciting. Great. So with that one, I think we can bring out all the panelists because we're going to move into some Q&A. Amazing. One, thank you, everybody. Truly, and I'm gonna keep saying this, and maybe it's because I used to work in a bookstore and all I know how to do is push books on people. You do want to go and purchase these books and to read them or rent them from your library, or maybe if you find it on somebody's off desk in the NYC office, you should just take it. I'm not condoning stealing, but these books are really lovely. So to begin, I really want to start with Aya because These Olive Trees, which is a children's book, is truly a beautiful tribute to your grandmother and to the future where Palestinians are able to return to their homeland. I also saw that it was published in August last fall, right before the ongoing start of the genocide in Palestine. And I wanted to give you a moment in particular to share into the space both what it means to be sharing your grandmother's story and how have you been able to connect with typically such a young audience about this deeply political and personal story during this space of time.
Yeah, so I think it really kind of came at a time when people needed it because like before 2023, there were barely any Palestinian children's books published in English, and also none really published by the big five or like mainstream publishers. And the two that are now picture books were both published last year. So that's insane. But also like I was just thinking about how this is the story that I wanted to tell like first, because it's not just my grandmother's story. I briefly touched on this in the author's note, but it's a story of every Palestinian. You talk to every Palestinian and they all have a grandmother story or like some sort of story of displacement. And I think that's the easiest way to start talking about what happened to us, not just to children, but also to adults who don't know about the Nakba or the expulsion of the Palestinian people in 1948 and don't know that that is the premise of it. Like most people, I think, would categorize the whole occupation as a conflict between two religions that has gone on for like 3,000 years or like some mystical abstract thing. Whereas like for us, it's about land, it's colonialism. It began in 1948. So that was the main thing I think that I was trying to talk about. And it's not just the children again. And since it's come out, since October especially, I think a lot of people have been looking for ways to start talking to the children about it, not just Palestinians, but just people in general. And it's been amazing. Like people have been reaching out to me with like pictures of their kids or just like thanking me that they were able to like find something like this. So in some ways it's healing. I think for a lot of Palestinian adults, it's also kind of healing because for Palestinians who grew up in the diaspora, there was nothing like this when they were children. So they couldn't see themselves in anything, but also we have this existence of constantly trying to affirm our existence or to prove that we do exist or what happened to us actually happened to us. And by documenting our stories in the ways that we can, we start to combat like institutional narratives. And that's, like obviously the occupier holds that power.
Thank you. I'm going to switch over to Karla. So in Catalina, the main character, she's chaotic, she's wild, she's idealistic, and early on, she truly believes she's destined for greatness as an actress. But then she's in college, and I sort of just noticed that she's acting, but for adults, her grandparents, professors, boyfriend, friends, which all felt really real and like resonated with me deeply. And I'm sure for many other immigrant kids, like that need to perform feels really real. So I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about this and sort of what maybe inspired you.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't think of Catalina as wanting to be an actress necessarily, but she wanted to be a star. She wants to be a star and she wants to be famous. And I think those are two sides of a very American coin. The dream or the idea of stardom feels to me like tapping into this just inherent desire that we all have, but that I think especially Americans are kind of conditioned to have, which is this desire to be the protagonist and the desire to be the main character. And Catalina believes in that firmly. And so there is like a level of acting where she's kind of living for an audience of one, which is herself, but also I think in the book somewhere she says that she sees like an imaginary audience, wherever she is, whatever she's doing, of like kind of like just a white person, just kind of always looking at her. And therefore, sometimes she has to say or do things that to confuse the white person, or to like, I don't know, to interact with the audience member. And so, yeah, and so I think she does think of it as a little bit of theater.
Great, thank you. Okay, now Nawaaz. I just want to say, I think it's very rare that a book can have me cry in the first chapter, but that's what Radiant Fugitives did to me. But there was really just so much tension between the sisters. And I would love for you to just talk a little bit more about that, because I do think that's something we see that plays out a lot in immigrant families between siblings, where like one will backlash and rebel against culture and the other one sometimes embraces it. And I would love to see what sort of inspired you and what it meant to write about Seema and Tahira.
You're right, I think. That particular dynamic I have seen in my family so many times. I mean, I have a huge extended family back in India, and some of them are actually here. And what has always surprised me is, one, and especially with women, how strong they are, but also how strongly they rebel in various ways. And I think when people have like different ways of in which they can be good, and being good is can be defined in so many different ways, by which social circles you move in, which religious circles you move in, and so each then tries to be good in that particular way. And I think that causes a lot of tension. We have, in my book, we have Seema, who has embraced her activist self, and there is a particular way of being an activist in the way she sees, where you both accept progressive values but also push against them, like if question whether it's enough or not enough, are we doing enough? While Tahara marries a very conservative man and joins that family, and she becomes much more traditional as the years go by, and she has her own way of deciding what would make a good Muslim in that sense. And when these two clash, and they do clash in the novel because they are sisters, and one of them has to come to take care of the other during the delivery. And so you have these two very strong women with very strong notions of what it means to be good, living in the same space for a few hours. And then what you find is this kind of both the fact that there is love between them, or at least there was love at one point, and now the fact that they are in such different states, in such different parts of their lives. And I think what was interesting to me, I think, was just seeing this happen over and over and again in my own extended families. And I wanted to try to capture that a little bit in this book.
Thank you. Okay, so this is for everybody, but I'm curious about how each of you made the decision to tell your stories in the format that you chose. So for I have, a children's book versus maybe looking at like a comic series targeted for adults. I think, Karla, I'm curious about your switch from nonfiction memoir to literary fiction. And I want to say you did that beautifully. I've seen folks not be able to master that as well. And I honestly, I read Catalina first, and I was surprised to know that you wrote nonfiction at the beginning. And then Nawaaz, from the storytelling happening from an omnipresent fetus, which worked really well. So I'm curious if you guys could all take a moment to sort of talk about why you chose the style that you did.
I want to hear about the fetus. Or
Yeah, I don't know what order because I spoke first. So I was like, maybe we should just go in the same order if that helps. For me, it was so I was a senior in college and I took a class about picture book making. And it was because I was kind of not really sure what I wanted to do with my life when I was in college, which is difficult. Like everyone's like that. But I was slowly just making more and more work that was narrative. I was majoring in illustration and I started making comics, zines, like work that always combined pictures and words. And I took this class, and the final project for that class was to do an entire children's book dummy, like writing to illustration in like a month, which is insane. But that was like the draft of this book was made for that class. And it was a story that I've been wanting to kind of tell. And I think it was because I grew up in Jordan. So I came to the US for college, and I'd never been confronted with I get like just being Palestinian in a space like this until I came here outside of the West Bank and just like soldiers and settler interactions. So I'd never been, I guess, like, no, you don't exist, or like confronted with that kind of sentiment and like just like a Zionist space where I'm alone in who I am, because I grew up in a community of Palestinians who were expelled. And so for like the years that I was there, my work just like naturally took that course. Like it just became about like my experience, my family, and I wanted to put it out there. So that book that I did for that class, I shared on Instagram, and people just reached out to me from there and asked if I thought about publishing it. So it wasn't really like me taking initiative, which is very good. I think it means that the tide is shifting, or like things are changing, because there were people in publishing who were interested, and it ultimately ended up with my editor, who's white Jewish, and she really felt passionately that books like this should exist because there were none. So that was kind of how it happened. And I'm not necessarily like just married to like the picture book format. I think it's fascinating. Like I go to bookstores, I look at picture books, I buy picture books. I don't think they're just for kids. I think they do so much. And yeah, it's just like something that I'm really interested in, because it's like a lot of picture and usually not a lot of words. But I'm also like very interested in the graphic novel format. Maybe I'll do that one day, who knows? So just in general, like the combination of picture and word, like that's where I'm at.
I can go. I wanted to write a novel, and I wanted to. The truth is, I wanted to write a novel while I could still kind of get away with writing the novel that I wanted to write. And I do think that, I do think that the kind of novel that I ended up writing, Catalina, which is just captures the voice of this very young girl. I wanted to capture that in like amber for people, this kind of sense of being in your 20s or your 30s and having a sense that you are hungry for the world. I think I wanted to do that. I wanted to do something that, did feel like writing that did feel very visceral, and that would feel the way that, like a pop album makes me feel, right? Which is not necessarily what I seek out in a book, which may be information or whatever. So I wanted to do something like that was like, that was able to, where the form was able to do what I wanted to do with the audience. And, in some ways I kind of like wanted to play a game with my readers, which again mirrors Catalina's belief that she, there's like a white person watching her. Catalina is a 20-year-old, I think, in the book. And I am, I'm not, and I kind of feels like I'm in like a parent-teacher conference about Catalina, and I'm like speaking about her. But yes, she does not behave all the time, but she means well, and I told her story. Thank you.
I'm obsessed with the parent-teacher conference thing, and you should continue to use that on tour. That's great. Okay, Nawaaz.
My very, very first draft did not have the baby It's not the fetus, actually. It's a very newborn baby. It's the baby at the moment of birth, of being born. My very first draft didn't have it. I was writing the story about these three women, the mother and the two sisters, and the conflict between them. And I found that my own preconceived notions were getting and my own emotions were getting in the way. I could not write these other two characters. Maybe I had some of Seema's thing that I could write. I had Seema's anger, maybe, but the other two characters, the mother who has in a way abandoned Seema, and the other sister who holds this kind of a sibling rivalry as well as a kind of um, a very Islamic look at what is needed for her as a Muslim woman to deal with her sister. And I found I just could not write those sections because my own anger and my own doubt and everything was coming in the way. And I was looking around for a way in which I could leave judging these characters. And one day I just came upon me that if I told the story from the baby's point of view, the baby does not hold any of these preconceived notions. He is completely new to the world. And he can then respond to these three characters with a love that when I started writing, that I could not feel for some of them. And I think through writing with that kind of openness that the baby allows, I was able over the many drafts to actually come to understand and love all those characters in ways that I'm not sure I'd have been able to do if I hadn't done that. So it started like a way for me to get a handle. And then I started thinking of this baby himself going through a journey of trying to comprehend what is happening with the US and his own state, what brought about his birth and how he was born. And so I think that's how the baby narrator came to be.
Thank you. This is for everyone again, and I think this is kind of a heavy question, but it's the one that I've been thinking about a lot. So in 2018, during the PEN America Awards, Jenny Zhang, who wrote Sour Grapes, during her acceptance speech, not only thanked the Chinese and Chinese American community, but she said that sometimes telling my people's story feels like a betrayal. And I think it's that tension of what it means to share some of our diaspora's most like traumatic stories for consumption, but also that balance of like, what does it mean to get our narratives out there? And I would love to just sort of see how you guys balance that tension and also what it meant for you to bring your stories to light in your books.
All right, I can go. I mean, that question was always there in the back of my head. I think the biggest thing of fear that I had was that I would be letting down my community. In fact, that I would be letting Tahara down. I didn't want, just because of my feelings against fundamental Islam, I did not want to color the whole of the Muslim world with that kind of paintbrush. And even within this very religious person, I wanted to be able to portray it in a way that is with love. And it took me a long time to get there. And even at every draft, I would ask myself, is this me speaking or is it the character speaking? Now, where is Nawaaz the author, and where is Nawaaz the author including in this work? And trying to get that person out, and just letting these characters be, because then I thought if I could make it as truthful as I can without imposing my own values, then the book may have some value to people who are also on the spectrum of where they stand with respect not only to religion but also to sexuality and how you deal with it, with respect to how progressive you are in your politics. So there are all these things that I felt like I will have to eliminate myself from that. And the other thing was to make sure that I did not present just one picture, that there was not just this one way of looking at things. And that's why the baby narrator, who's able to go into all of these different consciousnesses in a way, is able to try to paint a bigger picture than I myself could have done, if that makes sense.
Karla, I'm not sure if either of you want to take on that question.
I mean, I can answer. I don't feel that it isn't a concern that I feel. And maybe it's because I've done a lot of therapy. The first book, The Undocumented Americans, was something that was personal for a lot of people. And it created a very strong sense of intimacy with me, the author. It isn't the same thing as a writer. I don't necessarily pursue that. I would hope for my art to be kind of like processed, felt individually, person by person, but also something that does build community and that, feels good. It's something that's community building, something that feels like that. But I think it's an incredibly heavy burden to place on like little old me to have the power to betray or not betray an entire community. I don't have that power, but I think that writers of color and queer writers are often kind of perceived as occupying a space of being, of necessarily coming to the table with limitations or insecurities. It's like the idea of imposter syndrome, right? Which I also get asked about a lot. And I think that too is something that is a very heavy burden for people to have on their shoulders while they're trying to create art, where for me personally, and part of it, the reason why I wrote the book at night is that I really needed to be kind of free from eyes on me, from voices, from traffic. Like I really needed to hear myself think. And I can't hear myself think when I'm, listening to the voices of my community making me feel guilty, because that's what I already do constantly as a daughter of immigrants. I'm constantly feeling guilty about the people that I, on whose backs I stand, right? But because that is so much of the baseline of my consciousness and the way that I interact with even the food I eat. Like I can't eat this slice of cake because my mother did not have this slice of cake, right? I try to not put that pressure on myself when I'm writing, especially this book, which was fiction. The first book had, questions of, it was other people, but that's how I felt about this book.
Okay, thank you, Karla.
I think this question is very difficult for me because it's stuff that I'm thinking about all the time, and I'm kind of where Karla's at with some of it, especially like as a Palestinian, there's not a lot out there that represents Palestinian voices, and I think about that whole concept of representation or seeing yourself in things, and for a lot of Palestinian stories, they're always about what happened to us, and they're never about like a Palestinian is in like a regular like scenario, if that makes sense. And when people ask me like if I'm gonna do more work, they're always like, is it gonna be about Palestine as well? As if it's like a separate thing from like who I am, if that makes sense. It's like I can't get away from that, especially since like what's happening to us is still happening to us. There's literally a genocide that continues to unfold, and like nothing that I do can not be political or representative of my community, if that makes sense. And while I was making this book, because it's about my grandmother, I was thinking about like whether or not she would like receive it well, I guess, because it's like it's about her, but it's also like about just all Palestinian elders, and that was the panic that I had, which is insane because people kept asking me questions about how others would receive it, because like I was being censored before the book even came out. Like there was a campaign to not release it, and I don't care. Like I didn't care because like they're not who I'm thinking about, if that makes sense. I'm kind of rambling, like I'm all over the place, but like with things like this, I'm just always thinking about it, and I don't know, like I hope that we get to a point where we can just write stories about our people in better situations or in like better times, like in our homeland, like whatever, and be like separated from always having to do the same type of stories and have this burden on our shoulders that we're like representing our people and like representing our stories, because like nobody, like there's like an active like censorship or like an active effort to suppress it, deny it, all of that.
I appreciate that. The idea of like our people being in a Hallmark movie without having to talk about our identity, that part. Cool. So I want to bring in this question for Karla and Nawaaz, because both of your books bring up Obama and his politics from, and I would love to sort of see, I just like that. I feel like Obama keeps changing every single year for us as we like look back on his legacy. And I remember how much like we were excited for him, and as he's aged out, it has not been as great. So I'm curious about talking about how Obama has played kind of like an integral role in both of your books as sort of this like, I feel like he like captured the timing and set the timing really well for both of you. I'd love to sort of see what you guys were thinking when you wrote him in.
Well, I wrote about a character who would have been a freshman, I think, when Obama became president. So it is a moment of great enthusiasm and idealism in America at this moment in time. People are feeling good about themselves. White people are feeling good about themselves for having voted for Obama, especially in the context in which I'm writing, which is Harvard in 2008, 2009. So, he appears, I honestly, what you're, talking about is I wanted to write, and I still want to read also literature that is about our people, that are just kind of where it doesn't feel like the stakes are so high. Like if we don't tell the story right, then we're never going to get like human rights, like it's hard for it to not feel that way. And for this book, I really tried to get into the head of like a 20-year-old who's kind of like boy crazy and, is very talented, but doesn't know what to do with it, especially in a world where, she's undocumented. There's nowhere for that to go and where to put that energy. And Obama appears comes in and out of the book because he's part of the news, right, to her. He is the person who ends up controlling through executive order and power so much of her future. But what I find interesting, she spends a lot of time in the book thinking about Henry Kissinger, kind of like obsessing about Henry Kissinger. But she doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about Obama. And, it makes me wonder, I know that what I wanted to do as an author was to write about, the way that you can be as a young person. If you have a crush on someone, you can have a crush on someone in, the middle of a closet where you're hiding from, like, that is just the most fundamental. So I wanted to give her the kind of intensity and the right to be a 20-year-old inside her head. And so sometimes she doesn't think about Obama. So she'll like mention how he is ruining her life, but there are people close to her that are ruining her life even more at that moment. The way that, like, in an Olivia Rodrigo song, like, that heartbreak at 19 is like a forever heartbreak. I wanted to give her some of that, some of the right to have that kind of, way of self-protecting, I guess.
No, no, I liked what she said, how Obama is ruining her life. um, when there was one, when I started writing, I think actually the first political figure who came into my book was Kamala Harris, not Obama, because I was living in San Francisco at that time, and Obama was of course big, but Kamala Harris was the first Indian American or kind of to start making some waves. And what I wanted to do with my book was to explore the immigrant as a political being. Like, we are not just here, we are affected by the politics of what's happening, and we also play a part in it. And I wanted to, in a way, put Seema on a political stage. Like, I wanted to see myself or see immigrants on the political stage, and that was at that time in 2008 there wasn't much of that going on. And so I made a conscious decision then to try to see what Seema would be able to do if she were at the same time engaged in the Obama campaign. I had her engage with the campaign, but at the same time, what I was feeling at that time in 2008, and even in 2008 when Obama had won and there was all this hope, I think what Karla says, there were lots of white people who were happy about it, but it seemed to me that what was being set up, the immense backlash was already visible in 2008. Even before the election, it was beginning to be clear that there was going to be a huge backlash, and that the hope was not actually going to materialize. That's what I felt in 2008, and I wanted to capture that. And 8 years later, it somehow seemed to come true in a way. I mean, we had Trump come up after that, in a sense, in a backlash to that. And I saw what I was trying to do is to capture both the hope and how that hope has its inevitable demise built into it, just because we are dealing with people. If within a family we can't get siblings to come together, how are we going to do this in this country which is so diverse and so split apart? And Obama then became this symbol of hope in my book that was not going to actually succeed. And so the passage I read where he talks about the hope is juxtaposed with all this other stuff that undercuts it. Just before that, we have the whole Abu Ghraib thing, which is also American, as much American as the Declaration of Independence is. And so this contradiction was what I hoped to get into the book through Obama and through Seema's interaction and reaction to him.
Great, thank you. All right, so just want to remind folks that we do have a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to add it to folks in the room or to put it into the YouTube chat. So the first question we have, which comes from somebody in the audience, kind of ties into my last question. So this is kind of perfect. So she asks, spreading awareness is hard. So how do you spread awareness on immigration issues, and how can people help? And I wanted to sort of just add to that, like, what do you see the role of literature in the literary world means when it comes to amplifying immigrant voices and issues?
Okay, that's a very big question. I think that the fact that we're writers from disadvantaged and marginalized communities that, like I said, are sometimes just dealing with basic just erasure of people just not even acknowledging that you exist. I think the documenting and the art, I think, is very important. I think it's important for as many of us who can to help each other to kind of keep the fight going and the struggle going and keep the fire alive in all of us. And I find, my way that I can do that is through my art. And I find that the art that other people have made has often inspired me and given me hope, or given me the oomph that I need for fighting. And so I hope that my art is able to help people that way.
I kind of think similarly. I say this a lot, but like we do what we can with the skills that we have, and like I can draw and I can somewhat write. I can draw better, but like that's like what I'm trying to do. And I think everybody can like have some effect in some sense in the ways that they know how. Because people are always asking like what they can do to help or like make things better. I'm thinking about it, especially with like what's going on right now with Palestine and stuff, but like even like sharing on Instagram or like whatever, they're like, what's the point of doing that? And it's like even having a conversation could be something. But yeah, like I'm doing what I can with the skills that I've been given or worked on.
I mean, both I and Karla speak for, I think, I've said it. It is a very big task, I think, to make awareness as part of a requirement for your art as well. So sometimes I'm not sure that that's what I want to do, at least with my writing, that it's not about awareness, but more about trying to understand. I think, at least for me, the art is about trying to understand what is really happening, and through my art, because I don't know of other ways of trying to understand, and hopefully that understanding can be conveyed to others as well, because the world is very complex, and there's really and I, as a writer, cannot see things black and white. There's all these, almost every issue you see and say, yes, that's true, and yes, that's true, but what about this? And so I think that's useful too, to be able to just say, this is how complex it is, that nothing's simple, and that's something we may all have to deal with, just the complexity of the matter.
Thank you. So we actually have two questions for Aya, so I'm going to try to combine them together a bit. One person asked, how do you think teaching about past events to future generations could affect the future itself? And in that regard, somebody else said that they were really struck by what you said about wanting to write for those better times when Palestinians are back in their homelands. What would those better times look like for all of you? And do you think books and literature can help us get there? So maybe that first one for you, Aya, and then I think other folks can kind of elaborate on that second one.
I think it's really interesting. Like when people ask about like writing about past events and how that affects the future, I think about like what I'm really writing about and like, is it really a past event? I guess that's what I would ask. Is it really a past event if it shaped every bit of my life and continues to shape my life and it continues to happen? Like what happened to my family in 1948 rippled through generations. Like I was born in Jordan, raised in Jordan. I have a West Bank ID. I can't travel. I can't move. Like I'm restricted in like so many different ways. My mother was not educated and left me when I was a child. Like all these like the different things that like I'm dumping trauma, but you know what I mean? Like all these things that happened in my life. It's like, would that have happened if the initial thing didn't happen? Like would I have lived a different life? Like I was robbed of growing up in my homeland with my community, with my people, maybe my mother, you know what I mean? Like all these things that only happened because of the initial thing that happened. So in my view, it's not an event, it's a process. And I think writing about it, I'm not writing about something that happened in the past. I'm writing about something that is a process that continues to happen. And obviously, like, I guess that answers it in itself. Like, how could it affect the future generations? I think like it happened, and that's how it goes into effect. I'm also thinking about a graphic novel, Mouse, if anyone knows what that is, by Art Spiegelman, and he like talks about his parents who were Holocaust survivors, and also the book like isn't just about what happened to his parents, but it's about his relationship with his father and how it's like strained, and his mother, and that's like I think what I'm always thinking about when I'm writing about like historical things. And even like with Palestine specifically, like what happened in 1948, like it's still happening today. And I think there's like it's a failure to not really tie these things together or like to try to separate them. Like it's all part of one long process. And for the second part of the question, I think this is probably not the answer people expect when they ask, like, do you think books and literature can help us get there? No, I think that's a little delusional. Like, I don't know. Like, I think about that. It's like, okay, I'm writing a book. Like, do I think this will liberate us? Like, no. I think it helps move like certain narratives or perspectives, but I don't know if like literature necessarily will help us get to liberation. And yeah, like I guess that would be my answer to that. And what better times would look like. For me, I want to exist in a world where I'm not constantly having to keep affirming my existence or that I like do exist. Every day there's a different fight. Like right now, as I'm talking to you all, Columbia students are occupying campus and I'm gonna head over there like after this. I want to live in a world where I can just, I don't know, do something ordinary, like without having to constantly think about everyone else. And I'm rambling, but like, okay, so I came to America 6 years ago. I've been here for 6 years and I had the privilege of an education. I can speak English. I had the privilege of coming here and like staying here. And I just think about my family in the West Bank and how they would give anything to be in my position. So I feel like I can't do anything without thinking about them first. And I can't do anything that isn't about or for them, if that makes sense. And I think for me, like a better times would be to exist in a world where I don't have to constantly think about that, because they're living also in a better world, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Karla or Nawaaz, if you guys were interested in answering that second part about the role that maybe books and literature can help with.
I mean, I think that I think it's idealistic to think that they're super duper helpful. But Marx wrote a book and it inspired a lot of people to do a lot of non-book things. So, I do think that it can definitely do that. I again, like the idea of just keeping a people going, just, like poetry, or songs or different forms of popular media. I think helping people survive is a wonderful thing that, then those people have to like, well, how do they use their survival? What are they going to do with their lives? That's up to them. But, I feel like books can definitely help, but the motivation has to be there.
Changing the world. I mean, that's or making it a better place is so hard. But there could be smaller changes. One reader once told me that he made up with his sister, who he hadn't spoken for almost like 20 years after reading my book. And that seems worthwhile. If we can at least affect one or two or even 10 people, I think if we do that, that seems enough, I think, to ask for a book that somebody out there saw something in it that affected them. Yeah.
Right. No, thank you. I think my only add that I would have is I do think books can really bring in a lot of empathy. And I think there's a reason why the right is working so hard, especially in non-cities, to push for book bans. And that's actually a fight we're even seeing coming to New York City, and like what it means to suppress the words of others. And so I think that's the only thing I will sort of flag in the power of word, is that sort of the ability to bring in empathy. And I would say, like, when I grew up in Texas, I did not know anybody who was trans, but I was recommended by a librarian a book called Luna, which was a YA book about a young girl seeing her brother transition. And after I read that book, I immediately was like, ally, I'm in, I understand it, I'm supportive. And I don't think I would have ever gotten that narrative until I moved to the city, and how I would have responded then might have been different. So my only push about why I think books are helpful. Okay, so we're kind of near towards the end, so I have like 2 more questions. I'm assuming there are a lot of folks in the audience who might be interested in writing. So I'd love for you guys to sort of answer some classic questions around this. So writing a book takes a tremendous amount of time and effort. I'd love for you to sort of maybe go through like a day in a life of what it means for you to write. I know Karla, you sort of mentioned you write at night. I have through a class. I'd love for you to kind of just like walk us through your process of writing or illustrating.
Well, first, all of your responses made me like feel better, I guess, because like all of it was so like optimistic, and hearing like that, I think I've just been feeling terrible for like half a year or like useless and kind of nihilistic. So I don't know. I think I needed to hear some of that. So thank you. But yeah, in terms of like the process of writing or illustrating for me, I think I can do it whenever or wherever. I like to be in spaces that are noisy, which I know is kind of insane, but I need to feel like I can't escape and do something else. So if I'm in a coffee shop, for example, and there's people around me talking, I can't like watch a YouTube video and like do something else. I don't know. So I need to be somewhere where I literally can't do anything else. But also I work better when I have a deadline, even if it's not real. I feel like in college it was easier because I had all these like strict timelines for everything. So I was making so much work, and especially as an artist, like coming out of college, there's this like massive burnout. Like I haven't been able to just sit down and draw for fun in forever, and I want to like get back into that. But when you're like forced to do something, or when you turn your hobby into your career, I think it's difficult. And now I just have my agent kind of just telling me, when are you going to write the next thing or whatever. And now she's like, okay, like end of March, we're already past March, but like she's giving me like these deadlines so that I would actually have to make something new. But the last 6 months have been bad, obviously. So maybe at some point, but that's just like kind of how I am. I need to be like forced to do it.
Deadlines definitely are very important. Fake deadlines don't work on me. So my brain figured that one out. But I do try to get into the, anytime you write, you want to get into like the mood or into the headspace or whatever. I would say Catalina is a very like voice heavy book, and it kind of felt, it took a lot of time to get into the headspace where I was able to do that. Catalina has a lot of bluster. She, she carries herself with a lot of confidence. And yeah, the past, it's been horrible for so long that it's hard to get your computer up and be like, now I'm gonna, try to write hip hop. I don't know. It seems hard. So it takes for me, a lot of different beverages, warm beverages. I get a coffee, I get a tea, and I dump them, and then I get more coffee, more tea. A lot of meaningless rituals like that, while you're just like thinking. Go on walks with my dog. I do a lot of thinking on walks with my dog. Do a lot of listening to music on walks with my dog. Like Lord's album Melodrama, I think, did something that I wanted to do with my book, which was, again, kind of like encapsulate this moment in amber. And so, I would listen to it on my walks and be like trying to get inspiration from. Sometimes something I used to do when I was a kid is I used to be like, be in the shower, and I used to be like, see if you can be creative about the shampoo bottle, because I was a nerd. And I think that that's kind of nice to just be like, I'm going to find some inspiration on this dog walk, and I'll come up with something, and it may be shit, but at least I feel like my life has meaning, because then I can just take things and put it in my writing, and all of a sudden it's better.
I have to say that the first book I wrote after I quit my job as a computer scientist, and I thought I could treat it writing like a job. So you start at 9 and then you try to go for 4 or 5 hours of trying to write. And that's how I did the first few drafts of that, which is set a specific time and then try to treat it like a job and just do it 5 days a week. That worked for that, but I think now I'm no longer a computer scientist, or I don't feel like that. And now with the second book, it's very hard to treat it like a job. And so I'm trying to find different ways of getting back into the world of the book. What I've always felt helped me was a kind of, everybody's talking of rituals, and tea drinking and is another great ritual. My ritual has remained the same, which is read some poetry, read a book that you admire, read the work you did the previous day, and then try to move it forward. And that I'm hoping will work the second time around.
Great. Thank you all. Okay, so the final question, I'm going to bring us back to the fact that New York Immigration Coalition does a lot of amazing advocacy work, especially when it comes towards supporting and I think fighting for the rights of our immigrant communities. So I'm going to ask you guys a final question, and we're going to make it political to stay with theme. So you can change one law, policy, ideology about the United States. I have a magic wand. What will you do?
Wow.
No pressure, but everybody in the room will likely be judging you. No, I'm joking.
I don't think Americans would like my answer, but
Luckily, most folks in NYIC are immigrants, so go for it.
I think there's a lot of things, obviously, but if I'm thinking about like this year or like things that have been going on, obviously it's an election year. It would be really cool if we weren't stuck in this two-party system of center right and further right. So that would be good.
You know what? I would do some rearranging or some new interior designing in the Supreme Court. I would just change up. I would appoint my own judges. And that's the magic wand can do anything. The magic wand is coming for Clarence Thomas. personally.
Wow, those are great answers. I mean, I have all these things I would do if I had a magic wand, and now I can't think of them now when put on the spot. Um, wh- hmm. I think, and because I've been thinking a lot lately about AI and where we are going, I think some form of income equality, that we all have a baseline with which we could live on, so that we can actually live and not be caught up in this trap of trying to earn a living that destroys our souls. I think that's where I would go, that we all, each one of us, every one of us gets that chance to not be trapped.
Thank you.
I would go after the tech bros as well. AI. I take my magic wand to Silicon Valley, have a few meetings. That's what I do. Yeah.
I know. I was thinking there was like all these like good answers, right? Like housing is a human right, take away money, like destroy capitalism. And then there's a part of me that's like a super PAC for the people. Like some of these electives are being purchased for so little, and I'm going to buy them all and make them do good things. But thank you. I loved everybody's answers, and I wish I could actually give you a magic wand. And with that, I'd also like to just thank everybody for sharing your brilliance tonight, the stories, and I think just the words and illustrations are really beautiful. So again, for folks, if you have the opportunity to purchase and read these books, highly recommend. And I want to thank New York Immigration Coalition, to Indira, Heather, and Abigail for bringing us through tonight and for allowing us the space to have this conversation. And with that, I will pass it back over to Heather.
Hello again, everyone. I want very quickly to, first of all, thank Whitney for doing a remarkable job moderating a even more remarkable panel. I really also need to mention that this event, Genesis, is from Abigail, now staffer on our development team, who started as a Vista and whose idea this was, I want to say 4 years ago. When I joined 2.5 years ago, there were 2 authors that I really, really, really thought would be amazing on this. And I've checked both boxes. Karla, you are too. They just were so inspirational and so wonderful. And I knew it would be incredible. I didn't know it would be quite this incredible. I don't know why. I also want to talk a little bit quickly about the quote about it's not an event, it's a process, and then draw it back to the part about sister, or your point about a reader talking to their sister after 20 years, which is amazing, and that is part of the process. I think writing brings us together in very incremental but large ways. And I think we saw that in the room tonight. I know for you on the panel, you didn't get to see how rapt the audience was. Trust me, they were. I've had the beauty of being upstairs and downstairs today. But more importantly, just thank you all for coming. This is such a beautiful intersection of art and the work that we do and who we are. I am never more grateful than I am at the end of one of these events, and I just can't thank you enough. For those of you who are here as an audience member, please consider making a donation. If you would like to volunteer, I know we have some in the room that are interested. If you'd like to work with us in any capacity, please be in touch with any of us at any point. And finally, I will let you all go and thank you very, very much. We had a wonderful night, and I hope you did as well.